Hello, my name is Megan Blok, and I'm a senior history and communications double major at Trinity. And I'm going to let you in a little bit on the work that I've been doing as a research assistant for Dr. Dieleman over the course of this semester and the past semester. So just to let you know, Dr. Dieleman's area of research is the Protestant Reformation in the Netherlands, specifically focusing on the idea of Sabbath and how it was observed and theologically understood in Dutch Reformed communities. So he got accepted for the Teacher Scholar Grant from the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship to research how Sabbath practices are used as means of education in worshiping communities, specifically focusing on the act of worship itself and how that can be seen as a form of education. So I'm working currently as a research assistant with Dr. Dieleman for this grant, and I've tried to help him out as best I can. But Dr. Dieleman has been working primarily on the history part of it, so I know a little bit about that, but not as much, whereas I've been working on more of like the clerical things, which you'll see more of what that is. So let me walk you through basically a little bit about what we have been doing over the past academic year. So in the summer of 2019, I didn't start on as a research assistant until August of 2019, although I knew beginning at the end of the semester before, the spring semester of 2019, that I would be serving in this role. But in the summer of 2019, between the semesters, a survey was distributed by Dr. Dieleman to churches in the local area around Trinity. And the survey asked, your basic demographic questions, as well as asking about people's Sunday practices, so work that they did on Sundays, or recreational activities that they did on Sundays, and also some questions about Christian doctrine and like how well the survey participants knew or thought they knew about Christian doctrine based off of what their churches were teaching them. So when I got back to school in the fall, or in August, I started sifting through all of this data from the surveys, while Dieleman continued to work on the historical research side of things. So looking at, which is just an extension of his research area. So looking at Sabbath practices in the Dutch Reformed communities in the Protestant Reformation, and how education played into all of that. So just to break down the survey a little bit more, there were two main parts to the survey. And the first, as I said, was focusing on people's Sunday activities. So we had one section saying, list all of the recreational activities that you do, or what you would consider to be recreational. So we had lists for some of them, and then other ones they could write in if they wanted to. And not a lot of people wrote things in, so that made it easier for my job. But we made pretty broad categories, such as like shopping or like exercising, things like that. So they weren't like nitpicky, like, well, I always ride my bike this many miles or things like that. So it was pretty broad to help consolidate what people were saying. And then the other part of that was focusing on how people worked or did not work on the Sabbath, specifically Sundays. And so we were wondering what people saw was work, considered as work, and stuff like that. So there were working at home, working at your job, doing outside work, if you considered that to be work, when we're focusing on the 10 Commandments saying don't work on the Sabbath, keep the Sabbath day holy. So if people interpreted that as work, or how they interpreted that. So those were the two main Sunday activity things that we had. Again, pretty broad, just so that people can check what they do, and we can just kind of get an idea of what people thought was okay for them with their theological understanding and background and beliefs to do on Sundays and those sorts of things. And then the second part of the survey was more broad questions about Christian doctrine, either people's understandings or having blanket statements that they had to agree or disagree with, to see kind of how they thought of the Sabbath, how they thought Christians should be participating in that. So that was, again, just answering on a scale of 1 to 5, about if they agree or they disagree with that. Again, those weren't anything super in-depth about any specific theology, just more focused on the Sabbath and how people interpreted that and how they saw that as important or not in their development as in their Christian faith. So those are the two main parts of the survey. And so we took the data from the survey and we split it into the churches, the main churches that had a certain amount of people send in data. So we gave it to the churches, and then it was voluntary for members to, or people attending the church, to fill out the survey or not. So then they would put in what church they were affiliated with. And so if there was a lot of people from one church, then we would group all of that together, just so that would be helpful for the church to know, hopefully. So we split it by church, we split it by age, gender, how people specified their gender, and then also we had a category for people to specify their education level. So I think the lowest was less than high school, in case there were people who were still in high school who were taking it, or people who dropped out of high school before going into the workforce. And then also it went up to a professional degree. So either like a medical degree, a doctorate. I'm not well versed in that. But that was the ends, and then everything in between. So those were the ways that we split the data up. And then we took all of the data from each of those points, and we made different spreadsheets available for some of the church leaders that were interested in our research. Since there's a confidentiality thing with the grant, I can't really say specifics about who was part of this survey or answers that we necessarily got entirely. So if you would like more information on that, I would personally contact Dr. Dieleman to see what you can learn about that and what you can't. But this data was provided to some people who came to 2 seminars that we had on Trinity's campus. The first one was in November during the first semester, and this one was an introduction to the church leaders who had decided to come to our seminar. So they were introduced to Dr. Dieleman if they hadn't met him previously, to me, and also to just what the research was about in general. So about what the grant represented and why Dr. Dieleman was working through this grant, and then also specifically about what the specifics of the research that Dr. Dieleman was trying to get to. So introducing them to this, to the topic of Sabbath, to the topic of education, and the topic of worship, and how those all fit together. Of course, as church leaders, it was assumed that they already knew what all those things were, but we were just trying to get them to understand those things in a concept together, just so that they could think in a clearer direction of what we were hoping they would think toward when we were talking about all of our research and data and ideas and such. So we, specifically for us, were trying to understand what these church leaders were thinking in terms of their churches. So how they thought that Sabbath and Sundays were thought about in their congregation. So not only what they were preaching or their church stance was necessarily, but also what the people going to their church were doing and thinking and saying about Sabbath practices. So we talked about that a lot, trying to understand where their churches were coming from and where they themselves were coming from as leaders in these churches. We also tried to answer any questions that we could about the survey and research that was happening, that we were doing. Of course, we didn't have all the data organized at that point, and we hadn't analyzed all of it. So that was some rudimentary questions, more so than outlining exactly what everyone had said, and what all the research meant by that point. So yeah, our goal in that seminar was mainly just to meet the people, get to know them, that we would be relaying this information to, and then also to understand kind of where they were coming from with all of their churches and their theological teachings and understandings. So in that seminar, a lot of leaders brought up questions about either how to approach things or how to, just questions maybe they had for how to better teach their congregations or their churches. And so we took those questions into consideration as well for the rest of the research, to hoping that we could find some solutions or answers for them in our research that could help them with any questions or issues that they had come up with. Our second seminar was in March, actually March 13th, the day after all of this happened. And so that was the completion of the survey, basically. So we shared the data with the leaders if they had enough significant data to share with them. Otherwise, we shared the overall data with those leaders whose churches didn't necessarily have enough responses to make it significant enough. But we allowed time for them to look over that and ask questions or gather questions or gather their thoughts. And then the nice thing was that all the people who came to the second seminar and also to the first one, they were the same groups, more or less. Almost all of them had significant data from their churches, which was really nice because then it felt like we were focusing more towards their specific congregation that we could help, and not just overarching what the local churches were doing, which is also important. But it's just kind of nice when you have your own personal, like, this is what I know about my church or whatever. So that was good. We also answered questions about the data, some data errors that had happened with the survey, potentials for changes in the survey if we did it again or did it differently. And we also, Dr. Dieleman raised questions to them about education in relationship to Sabbath and worship. And a lot of that talk focused primarily on the church's role in education and a person's home or a person's family role in education. So that was what the seminars were about, more or less. So that's where we are right now and everything that we've been doing. It's been a little bit over the past couple of weeks, a little crazy with all of the COVID-19 stuff happening, and me now being in Washington while Dr. Dieleman is still in Illinois. So we have some next steps planned. Our grant is extended to November. So Dr. Dieleman will be able to continue his research with this grant funding until then. Which means that I'll hopefully be able to stay on, even though I'm graduating in 3 weeks. Wow. Hopefully I'll be able to stay on. So we're hoping that with the time we have left, now that we have a little bit of extra time, that we can shift our survey a little bit to try to reach a different demographic. We're hopeful that that will work out and we'll have time to deal with that because a lot of you, you go to Trinity or you are associated with Trinity, you understand that sometimes it's hard to get diversity in certain things. And we found that as a struggle a little bit in our survey too, that there was a lot of answers and information coming from one set of people that were all very similar, but we're trying to find a way to reach other audiences so that we can diversify our information and not necessarily generalize it to a bunch of people, but that we can get some more information about how other certain groups of people view Sabbath and such. So that's our next step, hopefully, and we're also in the works of doing some academic writing. We're not exactly sure what that's going to look like, again, because it's been so crazy. But of course, if you have any questions, or if you just want to know more about the specifics of what we've been doing, this is a broad overview and it did not go into details as much as I would like to. But yeah, so we're hoping that we'll have some writing done by the time all of this is over. So look out for that, or ask for information about how to get that when it's published. One thing that I wanted to talk about, just because I'm graduating in a few weeks, and why I would want to be a research assistant to a professor. As I said, my majors are history and communications. And I do love doing research. It's been hard sometimes in college because you're balancing so many things, but this opportunity to work with Dr. Dieleman has shown me that there are other ways to research than you just do for your classic university research paper, which is really great, because I'm hoping that in the future, sometime in the next few years, I'll be able to go on to grad school. And I want to go to grad school for museum studies. And you might not think of museum studies as having to do a lot of research, but with the career that I would like to pursue, research is a big part of that. And so understanding different methods of researching and understanding what researching looks like in the real world, I guess, if you want to say, outside of just my academic circle of professors and history students that I've been with. It's been really good to get that experience. And Trinity, as you all know, really values experience outside of our college classes. And so it was really, really great for me to be able to have this opportunity and to work with Dr. Dieleman on this. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, a little bit taxing at times, going through all of those, all that data, but you do what you do to do things that you love. And so I just want to thank you again for giving your time to listen to me talk about my experience over the past year with Dr. Dieleman and this research. Again, if you have any questions, or if you would like to know more about our work, please reach out. I will do my best to answer the questions that you have, or send you on to someone who is more qualified to answer them than me. And thank you so much again for watching, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your OPUS celebration.